All right. All right. So we are going to get started because I added a topic. And so I want to get through it all and obviously still allow for your Q&A. So it's actually more slide heavy than I would like, but it's all dense, sort of important information. Um, and if nothing else, I know that I do the slides for folks afterwards, right? So everyone who registered will get the slides. And so while not everyone can be here in the middle of the day, I do the slides so that even you can refer back to the slides. So there's more information than I would normally put in slides, but it's because I view them more as notes for you. So, all right. As always, mute your mic and be respectful and kind, but we always are because we're awesome, and that's sort of how we roll. So I just feel the need to say it just in case. And then the agenda for the meeting. So the last couple of weeks, especially with in-person meetings, a lot of my trans clients and non-binary clients have been asking me about the new potential FBI classification as terrorists for trans folks. So I added that to this agenda. So it's not just the shadow docket and the CHOP litigation, but also the FBI classification. And then, of course, your Q&A. So we're actually going to start with that, the FBI. Well, no, we're going to start with a, if I can work this. We're going to start with a estate planning. Oh, this is me, but you know me. And that's me rappelling down a building. Um, and it was for charity for Outward Bound, a 57-story building. And I was draped and wrapped in a rainbow flag. So it was the scariest thing I ever did, but I just told myself it was for charity. So we always start with an estate planning tip. So first and foremost, a lot of people ask, and Melinda, when we started this, that was a perfect, client, if you will, with 5 ferrets, birds, a dog looking at her so lovingly. And the big thing, especially, so pet directive or pet trust. So I'm not sure, Melinda, why don't you unmute yourself? I'll ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
What kind of birds do you have?
2 parakeets.
How long do they live?
Oh gosh, 20 years.
Yeah. So typically, and that's on the lower end of the spectrum. If it were an African gray or, they live to be about how long?
Geez, 75.
75 years. Exactly. So, and what about ferrets? I have no clue, actually.
Ferrets are very short, unfortunately. 5 to
And then
7.
dogs, 5 to 7,
Dogs,
so
12 to
7 dogs.
15.
Okay.
They
So
are in my will.
exactly, exactly. And tortoises are another one that my clients tend to have. Tortoises live I am working with a client now in Arizona. Their tortoise life expectancy is anywhere from 125 to 150 years. So, how do you plan for that? Not only will you predecease them, but the caregivers you have for them will predecease them, and so on and so forth. So, there's pet directives and a pet trust. I am a huge fan for the majority of situations of the lower cost, lower admin, less hassle pet directive. A pet directive follow the money that you set aside for a pet directive will follow the caregiver, will follow the person that you've instructed, that you've given directions to regarding the pet. So if you say for that those ferrets, 5 ferrets, and they cost about $100 a month, and you have to come up with a lump sum. With a directive, you have to come up with a lump sum that the durable power of attorney and or executor will pay out to the pet care agent for their care. So a lot of times we'll say 2,500 as just a thank you inconvenience fee because Melinda's people didn't think that they were going to wake up and have 5 ferrets and a dog this morning. So I don't really have a number around ferrets, but my thank you and convenience fee for cats is 2,500. and 5,000 for dogs because dogs are dumb and eat socks and just do things they shouldn't and are more expensive than cats. They have 9 lives and they just bounce back easier. So when clients ask me, listen, what's the standard? I don't want to think about it. It's 5,000 for dogs, 2,500 for cats. But if you have a dog, you know that $5,000 in no way, shape, or form. I know my Jen, one of their many dogs had vet issues in the last like month, and I'm sure that was a Jen. What did you spend just in the last like month and a half on your dogs?
Oh, I mean, definitely like 1,000 or two.
Exactly. Just in a month and a half, right?
Yeah.
Like 1,000 or two. So if you're leaving 5,000 as an inconvenience fee, right, as a thank you, that's in no way making the person whole. I think Jen's dog had like a UTI issue and like other things, but it was like $1,000 later to find out it was a UTI, right? Um, so it goes up from there. But a pet trust, the money that you assign to a pet trust. And I advise pet trust for folks that have tortoises, African grays, even, parrot, 20 years, where and or you just don't know the person who's caring for your pet well enough that you literally don't trust them because, listen, if you give someone $15,000 and a dog, they could take that dog to the shelter and then they have $15,000 and there's no oversight. So you have to decide how you know the person and the lump sum you're going to assign in a pet directive. That money is gone once the check gets written. And there's no control over what that human does with the animal. With a pet trust, there's a trustee. So I'm the trustee, let's say, the pet caregiver, right? The pet care person is Melinda, and then there's the pet. So Melinda then quarterly, no more often than quarterly. I like twice a year, maybe annually if Melinda has, enough funds to be able to support the animal throughout the year. But annually, and if not twice a year or quarterly, Melinda then submits receipts to me, the trustee, and then I reimburse Melinda from the trust. Okay. And then we usually say, so I like to put more than enough money in the pet trust for the life of the pet. And then if there's anything remaining, then we can also do a second thank you, right? Thank you. The pet's now predeceased and gone. So thank you for everything that you've done. Here's an additional 5 to 10,000 for everything that you've done during the life of the pet. And then the remainder to the beneficiaries that are already in your estate plan. And or a lot of my pet clients will then do a shelter or something along the lines where it's like, okay, we took care of our pets, we put 50,000 in, there was 12,000 left upon my death, 5,000 to Melinda, 7,000 as a donation to the SPCA. So pet care directive follows the human that you're going to care, that you're entrusting with the care for your pet, and there's no oversight, no enforceability. Pet trust, the money follows the pet, and there's always a trustee around that. So you decide from there which one you need, but they're very, very different. And obviously the cost associated with each is different. All right. And then the 9 essential documents, again, healthcare power of attorney with HIPAA, your living will / advance directive, your end of life, your HVA, hospital visitation authorization form, 1 and 2. This is for you and your partner and or spouse. And then HVA 2 is for your global visitation list. Powers of attorney, last will and testament and revocable trust. Revocable trust no longer optional. These are our marriage recreation tools. Okay, whether you have anything to put in it or not, I always say this is your revocable living trust. The water in it are your assets. If you have no water, it doesn't matter. You need a revocable trust. Okay, prior to the election, these were optional. Whoops, 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 whoops. Sorry. PowerPoint's harder. Or PDF is harder. Pet care directive we just talked about. Disposition of remains. Do you want to be cremated, buried, or medical science, or anything in between? Composting. Viking funeral. Did my first Viking funeral with a guy out in Colorado. So if you want, he'll set you on a pyre and set you on fire. And then tangible personal property. All right, so we're going to transition now to super depressing stuff throughout the rest of the show. All right, so trans folks, nihilistic, violent extremism. So the FBI has newly created this umbrella, all right, as NVE, not purely for trans folks. It is a new umbrella, purely new within the FBI, as nihilistic violent extremism. Now, several and that mainly right now is there's nothing right now tying trans folks to it, but what it has been used to is to bring in the online threats that they can't associate the reason. So you have online bully is the wrong word, but even hackers and online viruses that are doing things, and you have no idea where it's coming from. Political, whether it's political, whether it's based in monetary reasons, there's no clue. So they're just calling it this nihilistic violent extremism. That's all we know about it, is that there's a nihilistic aim to what is happening. So right now it has all been attributed to online threats where they can't decipher the reason behind it. Okay. Now, Project 2025 and the Heritage Foundation has said the government should, and this is what you saw in the news. Okay. The headlines, as always, were super scary versus where we actually are right now. So I'm not trying to downplay the seriousness of it, but also there is nothing that has actually happened. Okay. So it's just important to like balance the truth and reality with like what could actually happen. So the Heritage Foundation took it upon themselves to name what they want the FBI to include as an umbrella under the NVE as transgender ideology inspired violent extremism. Okay, so the other one was just nihilistic violent extremism, but under that nihilistic should be a specific transgender ideological. So there is no published directives naming this. It has not been adopted. It is being pushed by the Heritage Foundation. Okay. And publicly, because they do everything publicly, which we'll also see with CHOP. And that is new. That is new. Never before would the DOJ want a subpoena made open. Never. They always want that under seal, typically, unless they're actually trying to scare folks. Right? So this being made public is just part and parcel with their ideology and their end goal of fear. So, what should we watch for? Knowing that as we sit right now, nothing has actually happened. So, I have multiple alerts that if I would get a ping in the middle of the night, if there's any FBI or DOJ document, a directive that actually names this. Okay, none is public as of today, so it doesn't yet exist. What we also need to look for is just how NVE, the umbrella new term NVE, how it's used in actual FBI casework moving forward. Okay, so, and this is what I was talking about earlier, very recent federal cases cite now NVE for online network violence. Not yet LGBTQ plus identity issues, but if that shifts towards identity-based targeting, then obviously a huge red flag. Okay, data. So what the Heritage Foundation and Public 2025 are using in order to push for the TIVE, transgender ideology inspired violent extremism, they were able to come up with a data point saying that 50% of all school shootings, I mean, these are in briefs and have been submitted to the FBI, are linked to trans folks, and therefore that is why the transgender ideology violent extremism, that's a mouthful, say that 4 times real fast. But if you do any digging whatsoever, I haven't done the individual digging, but wildly inflated and completely debunked how they came at that number. Okay, from one of the sources I read is the dates that they chose, because there was, I forget which shooting out west at a school. It was a trans kid, right? So there were shootings that were directly linked to transgender folks, but either way, wildly inflated, completely incorrect is 50%. So scrutinize any future numbers. If all of a sudden the FBI starts coming out with numbers that in any way represent trans folks and linked to violence and or the LGBTQ community, scrutinizing those numbers forward, and then of course that's obviously a huge red flag. Um, and so this what this could mean, because I do see this coming. Reason I see this coming down the pike is we had the Supreme Court in a shadow docket case, which we'll talk about, say that racial profiling is okay for immigration purposes, right? That's been all the rage. That at the end of the day, yes, if people are brown, like that's all we have to go by. And so unfortunately, we have to racial profile in order to properly do our immigration duties. Wouldn't it stand to reason then that if sexual orientation and gender identity based folks are linked to terrorism and violence, that then they could do screening of all trans folks purely based on their identity? Because isn't there then an association to potential violence? If you are brown, is there a potential association to you being having an immigration issue? And if the Supreme Court okayed that, then why wouldn't the Supreme Court also okay using identity as a profiling? Because everybody cares about safety, right? So what this could mean, there are terrorist screening databases, TSDB, um, and people can be nominated now, like separate, just always by association, no charge. So hence, just having a linked identity would then link you by association. You haven't actually done anything. You're just brown. So by association, you have an immigration issue, right? So people can be put on this list purely if they're identified. And again, this all ties into CHOP and the creating of lists, right? Um, wait lists, watch listing rather, and screening frictions. So I have a lot of folks, the reason this has been coming up in the last couple of weeks is, should I fly? Right? Should I leave the country and then potentially not be able to come back in if the week that I'm gone, all of a sudden, the FBI decides then I'm a terrorist? Right? So, and even this group being created, I do want to say this, if they do actually adopt this, there won't be an immediate list per se, but you do need to start being careful. It's not an immediate list gets populated of every trans person. Um, More surveillance, the net gets widened. Again, that goes to my point of it's not immediate, but the net gets widened, right? So the more you travel, the more you put yourself, more interviews, more social media trawls. I may touch on that also in the next legal Q&A is social media scraping and trawling. A lot of folks are just, they don't want to travel with their phone. They want to travel with the burner phone. Um, so that there's no, at the end of the day, your social media is tied to you anyways. But what is the government doing? And if you use AI, do not ever use GROK. I mean, that may be obvious, it may not, but Elon Musk owns GROK. I would never put any of the search terms that I put in to I paid a lot of money to own my proprietary AI, so it's not on OpenAI, so that what I put out there in the world is not known to all, but never would I ever put in half the things that I put in GROK. So if you're LGBTQ and you ever use GROK, just stop because it's being tracked. Banking. So we see this, like, folks get detained by ICE. One of the first things you need to do is go in and clear out your person's bank account before the government does, right? So TSDB being on that list flags account closures, if you're a business, payment processing friction, no more PayPal, no more Venmo, all of the things, no explanation, no nothing. Prosecutors, if you're on this list, but get arrested for even something totally different. It's like a hate crime. Like you'll get an add-on because in addition to you having stole that Kit Kat, you're a terrorist, right? So just harsher charging and sentencing pathways. Um, all right, so that's a lot. If you want, we can stop there and take questions because I feel like that's a lot. Not what I expected to talk about. And then the shadow docket after this. But any questions just on that before we transition completely over? No, just Debbie Downer.
Got a couple questions in the chat if people don't, well, and yeah.
Um,
Angela,
yes,
when and if you get that ping in the middle of the night that has been classified, will you send out an email?
absolutely. Yep, to the
Okay,
whole list, not just folks that are registered for this, but to anyone and anyone that I have access to. Yeah.
great, thank you.
Um, go ahead, Haley.
Sorry. Somebody posted a good question and it was kind of related to my clarification question above that.
Can you
But
read it to me, Haley?
yeah, does by association mean anyone queer or even friends or families of trans folks, anyone who is an ally or comrade of trans folks? I'm assuming that the answer to that is yes. Um,
Well, you went on, I mean, Comrade, like some of the qualifiers there, I would say no. But
mm,
like the CHOP subpoena, for instance, they want to know, um, I believe I either have it in the slide or I have it somewhere here, but definitely they want to know all family members.
mm,
Okay, so definitely family members, allies through social media and any sort of allies. That's not the CHOP litigation piece, but I do agree with that. Allies, I would encompass in friends and comrades. But definitely the most vulnerable and exposed would be family members. You know, the DOJ subpoena wants to not only know the minors that have all gone through gender affirming care since 2020, but also their parents. And then they also want to know the pharmaceutical companies that they dealt with, the every provider, everything along, the lines, but why would you also want to know the parents? Right? Unless so definitely from a vulnerability standpoint, I would say family members.
okay. I think like in addition to that, I know the current way that they're like flagging people is primarily through traveling or if they're getting stopped and then therefore checking their social media. Obviously, we want to like burner phones is a great idea in general when you know that you're going to come in contact with anything like that. But is there, and maybe this is for next legal queer and A, is there something that we can do if we don't want to have a burner phone or if we don't want to, have this secondary existence on social media? Like, do we privatize everything? Like, what's the best way to go?
Yeah, and you're the person, right? I think the last time you said at work you
Yeah.
have some potential travel that you wouldn't feel comfortable doing, and
Mm,
would you have to if they made you kind of thing? Yeah. Um, so yeah, so I even just saw on Grinder, there was a new update that now they're allowing AI to scrape data and information and personal information and all the things, and how guys can opt out of that. So with every social media platform, there are fairly deep security settings that you have to research on how to activate them. Like it's not obvious. So then you become very so like if you're social and you want to be, in Buenos Aires and see who's around you, like these you just won't be able to do those types of things, right? But legally, long before the Trump administration, people have had security concerns and personal safety concerns around location services and sharing and all of the things that led to the ability to self-impose these layers of protection over you, but you're going to have to research based on the platforms that you're on, and then use them basically. So everyone has that. Burner phone obviously is the best, because then it's just you leave that phone at home and you travel and you have the SIM card and you do what you need to do in country. Um, yeah, if you delete your social, it's still there. The metadata is still there at the end of the day. They could still, everything that you've ever done online is there.
Yeah.
And that doesn't ever get scraped or go away. So, um, but does that answer your question, Haley? It's not a
Yeah,
good answer.
it's like it's what I expected, and I appreciate you addressing it of like, you know, as we get through this, currently the only way that they can really screen you for and like label you is if they have something physical. I think the biggest thing that I'm concerned with is if they just start scraping social media in general without having your physical phone in front of them. Like tweets, social media posts that have nothing to do with political event, but just
Right,
flagging you as trans or queer or anything. That's
right,
that's when, I mean, like, I'm worried now, obviously, but like there's not really a whole lot you can do to prevent getting in trouble at that point.
right.
Yeah.
And like I said, I'll do more research on scraping and trawling
Hmm.
around social media and how it actually works. I'm really 92 when it comes to technology, so I have no idea. And I don't tweet and all of the things, but and as you can tell from my social media videos, they're just me talking to a video with zero editing. So I suck at all things technology, but I am traveling internationally soon and I have a social media following. And to your point, travel is the number one, you know, way in which we are availing ourselves to them. We are traveling. It's fine. It's easy getting out. It's getting back in. That's going to be hard, right? And that's when you meet the US border control folks, and they're the ones that are problematic. You could be going to Russia. You could be going the worst place in the world. Actually, where you need to fear is when you come back in now. Okay. And so then what does that look like? And like I said, there are things that you can do when traveling, especially if partnered. Don't go up together, go up separately. No need to put yourself on, a radar as an LGBTQ couple. And just know that if you do get detained and you did nothing wrong, they can only hold you for up to 6 hours. Um, and they are doing that. But all right, so shadow docket. So shadow docket, other than just sounding cool, is this horrible thing. Um, so it is the Supreme Court's emergency powers. Okay, so you send something to the shadow docket for an emergency summary order. And the only thing that can be decided on the shadow docket are stays, injunctions, and summary, meaning temporary reversals. But without full briefing, no oral argument, and no opinion. Okay, so this has been around for decades, but only in the last 5 to 7 years, right? 2016, Trump, really in the last 5 to 7 years has the shadow docket taken on like a rampage. So these orders change policy overnight. They make decisions, and it's nothing like you see on the news. So a party asks for extraordinary relief, usually claiming irreparable harm. So they have to have an emergency of some sort. The court can then freeze or revive a law nationwide pending litigation. So these are never just final orders, but it's extraordinary relief pending litigation and zero explanation. So they're temporary orders, but they decide why you should care. They're temporary orders, but they decide people's lives right now. I'll give you a handful of the ones that have been decided just in the last 9 months. They've decided trans youth care, trans bathrooms, trans folks in the military, all short, unsigned orders, no oral argument. and they're happening faster and faster and more. And you have no clue as to why. So October 7th through August 9th, less than a year, we've had 119 emergency applications. That's up hugely. Substantive applications, a lot of these are death penalty. So of these 119, I think 34 were around death penalty. So remove those. Right. So substantive applications mean laws that impact everyday life, not one person's life, but American society. 44% in 2024 through 25 through this time period versus 23%. So up 20% of substantive applications. By administration, Trump number one, 46%. Biden 31, Trump 2, 67%. Huge. The use of the shadow docket to get done what they want to get done. Outcome pattern, 75% of the granted relief are some sort of conservative outcome. Because obviously in the last 10 years, the makeup of the Supreme Court is what it is, and it just basically it will almost always lean their way. Public disagreement. So you can, while you don't, there's no opinion, while you can't write a dissent, you vote. And so by voting, I dissent, that's sort of like a written opinion that Kagan and, Sotomayor and are known for. And so in this 9-month time period, 67% of the substantive applications had a dissent. Before this 10-year time period, 13. Meaning it didn't feel unconstitutional. It feels like they're deciding things without us knowing. Nobody even knows these are happening. So it feels as though some of the most important, life-changing, impactful issues, especially for the LGBTQ community, especially for trans folks, are being decided behind closed doors with zero oral argument, no publicity, and no opinion as to why. 67% from 13%, almost 70 to 10. Now, the dissent feels the need to let the world know they're dissenting. And then just the overall volume, this 119 is up 3 times from just the year before. So recent cases that were decided on the shadow docket, the military service ban. And then the impact of that, Pentagon began discharging trans folks, and no one who's trans is allowed to join the military. Again, pending litigation. This is a huge one. No one knows about. Idaho, youth gender affirming care, that it's a felony. Anyone associated, again, going back to Haley and associations and, these CHOP subpoenas and what they're trying to gather as far as information and the parents, and it's, everyone could be charged with a felony that is involved in any sort of, so impact care for most trans adolescents in Idaho halted overnight, with providers at those institutions, hospitals facing criminal exposure. Maine, this made the news mainly because it was on social media to begin with, but there was a post on social media and a politician in Maine identified the trans athlete in a social media post of their own. So made their own post, but with a photo of a trans athlete saying like this person, and then bullying and online harassment and basically online harassment. There's no other word for it. The trans minor then had to deal with. So the Maine legislature decided to revoke that person's ability to vote and or speak on the House floor. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. They framed it as a First Amendment issue and said the order, but regardless, the response to that was that this politician was allowed to harass online a trans minor. There was one pro LGBTQ case on the shadow docket recent, 20 days ago, trans bathrooms in South Carolina, an emergency bid to enforce a bathroom restriction law. The impact ultimately is that moving forward, the boy in question, and as a result, any and all students covered in South Carolina covered by that will have access, bathroom access preserved pending the litigation. And then pending. This one's huge because folks are still reaching out to me. Can I update my gender marker on my passport? Right. And so since around July 1st, I believe, through today, there has been this window where the Trump administration has been enjoined. They are not allowed to enforce their policy. So as of September 19th, 11 days ago, response due by Sotomayor on October 6th is, again, a emergency relief. Don't halt, stay rather the injunction and allow the Trump policy to proceed. The impact, if granted, would be that trans and non-binary people will no longer be able to update their identity on their passports. Go ahead, Melinda.
So my sister is trans. Her birth certificate has been changed. Her social security, she's had top and bottom surgery. How would this affect her? How would they be able to say, no, you don't?
Because her sex assigned at birth is male. And if they go back and say it must, because they know the birth certificate's been amended.
Okay, that answers it. There we go. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
At the end, where I see this going 5-7 years from now, whatever it is, maybe faster, is that from a federal government perspective, they will say that transgenderism, if you will, or transgender folks do not exist. Like that does not exist. So if it doesn't exist, everything your sister did
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Yep.
And at the next renewal, it will all be back to your sex assigned at birth, and all of the updates accordingly. So we should hear this by next week. Also, next week, August 7th, is the Childs versus Salazar oral arguments. Again, that the case that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So next week is a big week. We have this due from Sotomayor, and then also the Childs oral argument in front of the Supreme Court. Okay, so is this concerning? Yes. I alluded to this earlier, that at the end of the day, a shadow docket, there's no reasoning because there's no oral arguments, there's no debate, there's no back and forth. We don't hear the questions that lead to the answer. Inconsistent, just is what it is, based on a simple vote, and impossible to defend, obviously, because they just make the decision. And then critics argue that it shifts more power to the court with less transparency, allowing major policy changes without any sunlight on normal opinion, which we typically would voice. Okay. CHOP litigation. So what the DOJ did 3 months ago at the beginning of the summer, they served subpoenas to 24 hospitals and clinics around the country that treat trans youth and provide gender-affirming care. And then again, I alluded to this earlier, they decided to publicize it, which they normally never do. Because if they truly are trying to catch fraud, you don't just publish that and then let those committing said fraud find a way to hide said fraud. You secretly go through channels and seek to discover and uncover said fraud. And so what is the DOJ asking CHOP and others to turn over? Personally identifying data for all patients under 19 since 2020, and as well as their family members, diagnoses, assessment, intake forms, parental authorizations, anything and anything. Communications, doctor-patient communications through a portal, internal communications through staff related care, billing and insurance information, coding, employee personnel files that they worked with, training manuals and protocols, and then again, to Haley's point, external ties. Like how far does this go as far as like the association? External ties, communications with drug manufacturers, sales reps for medication used in gender dysphoria treatment. All right, so this is really heavy as far as text, but what are they basing it on? Fraud, right? So you have to have a reason to sue someone and or to subpoena someone and request information. They're saying that CHOP and all of these other medical facilities have engaged in fraud because they don't view the program that they're providing medical services to being legit. So the billing, right, the core civil hook for billing, diagnosis, and consent records. And the DOJ could argue that the claims were false, that the medical care necessary was improperly coded. Like they're reaching. They're obviously reaching, but they needed to base the subpoena in something. And then in some of these states, they've already deemed, Pennsylvania is not one of them, but in some of the states, gender affirming care is for minors is not legal. And so if they continued to provide it, then from when it became quote unquote illegal, and did they continue to provide care? And then they'd be in trouble from that point forward. Misbranding, off-label theories. The DOJ to talk to the FDA around misbranding, and if they contend the drugs were promoted for gender dysphoria, but it doesn't have an off-label brand for that. And then same thing, false statements or obstruction. So these are their bases for the whole thing. Really, really reaching. Where things stand now, I have existing clients of mine who have kids. So where do things stand right now? Just 5 days ago, several CHOP families, along with a local law firm and a public interest law firm, have filed motion to quash said subpoena, and obviously stating it's overbroad and lacks any basis in law. So the families are now, and this is what we've been waiting for, and what I told families would happen about 6 weeks ago, the families now have separate representation. So CHOP is defending the records, but if CHOP gives over the records, these other people are impacted. And they needed representation in order to quash the subpoena to protect their rights to say, if you force CHOP to hand over the records, we're the ones actually impacted. Okay, so now there's 3 entities in the mix: the Department of Justice, CHOP, and the families impacted, and they're represented separately now. And of course, the DOJ asked the court, unheard of, to unseal CHOP's motion to quash. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely unheard of. And so it's been unsealed, and it confirms that it's a 7-page request list asking for every writing or record of whatever type whatsoever dated to 2020. So good news, if there could be. In a exact same situated case in Boston, a federal judge said absolutely not to the Boston CHOP, right, where Philadelphia's CHOP set on September 9th, calling the DOJ's effort fishing expedition. And so we believe that CHOP then filed theirs after that decision, right? So if on December 10th that came down, by the 25th, Philadelphia CHOP filed their motion to quash. Why? Because they were able to get the ruling and the analysis and legal basis of this federal judge in Boston. And so CHOP cited that case and was heavily relied upon in everything that I've seen. So that is that. Q&A. Next legal Q&A is October 14th at noon. Don't have an agenda yet. I feel like every time I try to set an agenda 2 weeks in advance, the world in which we live in co-opts it and changes it. I didn't know 2 weeks ago that trans folks would be terrorists. And so, you know, you never know what you're going to have to cover. But loosely, in one of the emails that we send out in promoting, you know, just reminding you about the 14th, we'll let you know what the topics are going to be then. All right. Any questions about these three topics or about whatever you want, really? Come on, Carol Ann.
I put a question in the chat. I have a question about like how all of these new things are affecting immigration. And in terms of, you know, if Obergefell gets dissolved or taken away, like what that means for international folks. So
Yeah.
I'm sponsoring my husband to move to the United States from Costa Rica. And so it's a very scary time to be
Yeah.
Latino
No,
in the
for
United States.
sure. Yeah. I mean, if you saw my legal Q&A from 2 weeks ago, my good friend Jason now lives in San Salvador, in El Salvador. If you would have told me 2 weeks ago that Jason would be living in El Salvador, I wouldn't have believed you. But Henry got out of detention and he was sent to El Salvador. At least he's out of detention, so there's that, right? When I asked Jason how are things, and he goes, "They could be more horrible." And so, but Henry came here illegally when he was 17, as what they termed that to be, and had a final detention order, a deportation order rather, and because when he was 17, he was tried in absentia, but he didn't know that. He didn't know enough to know at 17 what was happening. And he was in custody when apparently the hearing happened. And so he wouldn't have been able to attend to begin with. But once you have that on your record, you have it. And so more so, Sydney, than Obergefell, the State Department v. Munez case is the case that LGBTQ folks need to be worried about as it relates to all things marriage equality. But State Department v. Munez decided June of last year, 2024, when I did that 3.5 hour marathon legal Q&A. That was the main one with Kim Davis and the challenge to marriage equality and why I didn't view Kim Davis as the threat, right? Why I view this State Department v. Munez case as the threat. And that is a straight couple immigration case, not even related on its face to LGBTQ issues. But it says while everybody enjoys the fundamental right to marriage in this country, you do not, by default, automatically enjoy the fundamental right to cohabitation with your spouse. In other words, even if with Jason and Henry, they're legally married, Henry got deported. That is a Sandra Munez, exact same situation. And it was El Salvador as well. But it used to be prior to this case in June, it used to be that if you were an American citizen, you married someone that you wanted to continue to date, right? Look up the movie Green Card from the 70s with Gerard Depardieu, and, any movie, it's like, if you marry someone, boom, you can't take this person away from me. I'm an American citizen. That's my spouse. Can't take them away from me. So people would get prenups because we want to date, but in order to continue dating, we have to get married. Long gone. Okay, your spouse can be taken away from you, and ultimately, you don't have the right to cohabitate per that case. And in my opinion, that case is the beginning of the unraveling of all of the other rights inherent in marriage. You have the right to marry, you don't have the right to have children. You have the right to marry, you don't have the right to tell someone they have to marry you, i.e., Kim Davis, and how I see Kim Davis doing a victory dance like 10 years from now. Is ultimately 10 years ago, that's what she got arrested for. But where I see this going little by little are the rights inherent in marriage. To Sydney, did that help? For me, it's less so Obergefell. It's the cases around Obergefell. Obergefell will get chipped away at. I don't see a big overturning of Obergefell. I see, because Amy Coney Barrett even said, everyone has the fundamental right to marriage. That was Obergefell. So how can they overturn that? I see them chipping away at it, death by a thousand cuts. And we just have to stay on top and vigilant of which of those cuts are happening and how we're impacted. Jen's going to be impacted differently than me, different than Sydney, different than Melinda, different than Carol Ann, right? And so what that looks like for people. And again, I could be wrong. There could be a massive overturning of Obergefell. We'll deal with that. But how I view things unfolding is less of a mutiny and less of a massive overturning of Obergefell and more so of an undercutting of it through the precedent they just set in the State Department v. Muniz case. You will hear that cited time and time again. Are there any questions in the chat, Jen?
I have a question. I think you were saying Sydney, but it was Scotty, I think, who had asked the previous question. I'm Sydney. I work at a queer counseling practice in Washington. I am really curious about, I mean, we're already doing protective practices in the counselor's notes for like how they're talking about things, but I mean, if they requested records, it would be clear that some of our clients are trans or, you know, like, so how, like, does HIPAA protect us and the clients at all? Or,
I
yeah,
mean,
like,
you would think
well, if
so.
we do, well, yeah.
Right. Right. I mean, that's what CHOP is saying in these 24, right? Um, so I'm just having thoughts. I may do one of the legal queernies, bring an owner of a very large, like, outright, all they do is gender affirming therapy and, support groups and all of the things, but they reached out and were like, a few months ago, maybe 3 months or so ago, when the Department of Health and Human Services said that on a federal level, which is what the Idaho shadow docket case was about and why that was impactful about minors in particular. But the Department of Health and Human Services on a federal level already said medical providers cannot provide gender affirming care. So then therapists started coming to me because it's haphazard, as most things in federal government, of how you define what a medical provider is. And in some statutes, based on some agencies, therapists are included in that. So he was asking me, what do I do? Are we currently engaging in illegal behavior per this new whistleblower? Like, if someone wanted to whistleblow, right, would we get in trouble? And then he called his malpractice liability insurance, and they're like, we have no clue. And he's like, I could be sued. You're my malpractice liability insurance. The fine print says contact us if you think you've engaged in something, right? And so, all to say, it's a more detailed, nuanced conversation that probably deserves its own conversation around therapy practices that provide gender affirming therapies, care, talk spaces, because this Childs v. Salazar is around conversion therapy
Mm-hmm.
for minors, around professional speech and protected speech. And she's saying her whole argument is we're just talking. And if I want to talk about how God and conversion therapy, then you're limiting my speech. So wouldn't the same be true
Mm-hmm.
about your speech with a trans, non-binary, gender diverse youth as her, right? So if anything, I think the Supreme Court's going to side on First Amendment grounds and protect her ability to do conversion therapy in a talk setting, in which case, how do they disallow you the ability to do the same?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And then going back to the question from earlier, for the people who are like flagged in the list of trans violent whatever bullshit that is, would we count also? I mean, I'm gender, who knows? But like, would we count in that as allies or whatever to the community and be flagged as violent terrorists for providing gender affirming care?
I would think that initial list, and this is think and again talking out loud in unprecedented times
Yeah.
of just WTF, right? Is governments have a hard enough time with bureaucracy and making lists and having like good information that first and foremost, where they will start will be folks that had X on their, as a gender marker, name change, not just a name change, but gender marker change.
Hmm.
Because I have a lot of folks who have horrible parents who just want to change their name to no longer have their last name associated with their parents. So name
Hmm.
change in and of itself. Um, and bye, Ted. Good to see you. And so I think the folks who have done legal document changes and first and foremost, then ally, like I don't see how,
Yeah.
but I mean, you had that with the Red Scare and when they were rounding up communists and oh my God, and it's like, oh, but you are associated with, right? But they already had the lists made up, and then you had to be an associate of the list. So the classification does not yet exist. First and foremost, let's just remember that, while we think it will be, but the classification itself does not yet exist. So if it does come into existence and then there's a list, then the association, right? It's down the path, but not immediate.
Okay. And did you mean that anyone who had changed their name to not be associated, because like that's what I did. When we got married, we didn't want to have each other's last name because our fathers are both criminals and we don't like them. And so we picked a new one. I changed my name legally through like a court hearing, whatever, so that before the wedding, so it would be on the marriage certificate for her to do the easier, cheaper way to change her name. So would that flag me, or are you saying that that alone would not if I didn't change anything else?
Exactly. That alone
Okay.
would not. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a
Thank
lot of
you.
millennials combining their last names, Giampolo and Graves,
Hmm.
right? Like, and how we merge that together or something.
Hmm.
So name change in and of itself, no. Gender marker would be the additional flag.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, Haley. Sorry, I didn't see that.
No, sorry. I saw that there were a bunch of other questions in the chat, but I just wanted to tack on to that, Sydney. My my wife is also a mental health provider, and what I have understood from this is that HIPAA's a lot harder to dismantle, especially since we already post a lot of our gender identity stuff online. They're probably going to form lists on what we already post online faster than it would take them to dismantle HIPAA and then form a list from that. Maybe I'm talking out of my rear end there, Angela, but that's kind of the way that I've interpreted this is like they're trying to figure out the fastest way to come up with a list, and if we already post that information online, that's the fastest way for them to gather it.
Yeah, no, in all my research, every time I'm looking at any of these things, social media scraping and or trawling comes up as
Yeah,
like one of the first things. So,
yeah.
um, uh, Jen, I just opened up the Google Doc that you sent me. Is there anything I haven't addressed that's in here?
Yeah, there's a couple. The first question that was in the chat from Angela. Um, Thank you so much for these sessions. I finally have a question to ask. If my partner and I travel to a red state or to a place where gay marriage is not legal and one of us were to get hurt and needed medical attention, how do we use the hospital visitation authorization form to ensure we can get into the room and handle the care for the other? What about the form allows us in and will force the medical personnel we come into contact with to listen to us?
Yeah, absolutely. So these are now available as a standalone on prideplans.com. So a lot of folks already have their own documents and but they don't have this one. So now you can just buy this separate. It's just a contract. I don't know if Angela's still here, and if not, I'm sorry we didn't get to it sooner. But this is just a contract, and so at the end of the day, this you hold on to one another's is the key, right? So you have to have the one of your partner that says, my partner allows me to be able to visit in any medical or treatment facility. So the key to this actually working is you are holding on to one another's. And then you have it on your person. And then in 17 years, this has gotten two couples their final 5 minutes with one another and countless accidents where there's no question. Why I love documents and is at the end of the day, you don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to reason with anyone. You don't have to explain yourself. You just get to do the thing. And this says, I get to pass go, collect $200, and get into that hospital room. Please excuse me. Okay. And a lot of feedback that I've gotten from folks in like random countries is because nobody cares about HIPAA other than us. Nobody cares about privacy in most countries. And so the feedback that I've gotten from folks is they're just so in awe of the fancy laminated thing. They're like, okay, just go. Like, all right. Like, why do you have a card? Like, just, but there is also HIPAA on here so that, and if you do waive HIPAA, if you waive privacy in one country, the reasoning is you've waived it in other countries as well. So if you've waived your HIPAA rights in the US, but you happen to be in the UK, which calls it something different, that by virtue of the fact that you've waived HIPAA, now you're in the UK, you've also waived it there. Okay. But prior to marriage equality, my clients kept this on their person purse wallet because we weren't considered married anywhere, not any of the 50 states, none of the 195 countries around the world, nowhere. Post marriage equality, this went in your passports. Again, one another's passports so that you have it. And then post Obergefell getting overturned, then it really depends where you live, right? So one of the 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to marriage is automatic visitation rights to your spouse. All right. But if you're somewhere where that's not recognized and or it's not legal where you are, this is the one document where I remove the mention of spouse. I don't want to out you by virtue of this card. Could be in Tanzania where it's illegal to be LGBTQ. I don't want you to be like, oh, here's a document that says that's my wife over there. Right. So it's just Angela, allow Carol Ann. Okay, period, end of story. No identifier as spouse or domestic partner. HIPAA. So this gets you in the room. That's how the force part is. It gets you in the room because it said, I, Angela, allow Carol Ann to visit me. And then they have to talk to you because you have the HIPAA waiver. But now you have no power. So it's great to get this done. But at the end of the day, having access to these documents, if and when you need them, is key. So I then email my clients all of their documents, the 9 documents per person. You'll get them individually renamed as PDFs, and you'll save those to the cloud and upload the healthcare trifecta docs, this being one of them, to your patient portal if you're part of a health system and or your physician, doctor. But uploading those documents to your patient portal, it's great to get this done, but actually having access to them if and when you need them is key. All right, that's the other part. How does this force you to get in? Well, if you don't have it, nothing. Right? So get you in the door. They have to talk to you. You have no power. Then you go to the cloud to pull down the power document, and now you have all 3 together. Okay. Carolyn.
You keep using me as an example, so I might as well tell you. Um, I was actually asked yesterday, I was in an appointment, and they had asked if I had any documentation like a living will or a power of attorney. So it actually came in handy. So that's a good thing. We were able to just pull it right down from the cloud, and they were able to add it to my chart.
CA and her wife are clients. So we
Yes.
just did these a couple months ago for them.
Yes.
That's awesome. Good job. Yeah, I just had another client reach out via email. 12 years ago, I did their confirmatory adoption. 12 years. They've never used it. They've always kind of felt like it was something they paid for peace of mind, but that they'd never really need. Actually, at CHOP, shockingly enough, child bleeding, all the things, woman comes in, biracial couple, right? All of a sudden the one woman challenged, like, who are you to the patient? His mom. Prove it. And so for the first time ever, had to pull down from the cloud proof of the adoption decree. Never ever. At CHOP. Um, and yeah, layovers, right? Like I had a conference in Miami. So there I am in the state of Florida. And then from there, layover in Atlanta. Now you're in Georgia. So you don't even have to be in Tanzania where it's illegal to be LGBTQ. You could just be in Tennessee, which is just as hostile. um, any other questions?
One of the questions from the chat was, I know this is a dark way of thinking, but I do wonder whether it's actually safer to not get married as a queer person in some backwards way. My mind is going to whether it's safer to not be more easily identifiable and on a list.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, marriage certificates, and I mean, you're putting yourself on a government document at the end of the day. You have to put your gender there as well. And so that's the identifying marker there as far as like identifying yourself as, same sex. Um, but they're state level lists. And again, if you think about a lot of like small town, I mean, my mind, the way that I think is I tend to think to what are the heavy lifts that would need to be had in order to gather said information to then use said information in any sort of way. And there's just so many, to use the word backwards, like backwards, small county towns where like this is just paper, right? But then like there's San Fran, New York, Atlanta, Miami, Philadelphia, where the paperwork, and then, I mean, yeah, it's just hard to refute that. At the end of the day, it's a government document and you're putting yourself on a list by choice. But there are the 1,138 state and federal privileges tied to the institution of marriage, which are not insignificant, nothing to sneeze at, and we deserve those. So to not avail yourself to that because of that list, but I do view marriage certificate lists, especially since they're state governed, as one of the hardest for them to utilize. Financially, how are you protecting yourself? Crypto, USDC, stable coin, much easier than an overseas bank account. All right, overseas bank account, you have to in some way open that overseas, trip, what have you. But just opening up a Coinbase account tied to your social, but not touchable unless you've committed fraud with that money. USDC, stable coin, right? So not Bitcoin or anything that would be volatile. But if you have $100,000 in that account, I'd much rather be in the cloud in USDC stable coin than you triggering international taxes by going to Canada or going to some country where you're not a citizen and opening up a bank account. So definitely USDC over any type of overseas bank account, unless you have a tie to that country and there's a reason why you would. Otherwise, you're probably going to cause more tax issues. If I were ever detained, what measures can I put in place to protect my son? You need to have them in advance. So, oh, good, you got that. The detention templates, Jen, you sent those. Yeah, perfect.
Yep, I did.
Okay. All right. So I am going to find a way to make the next one a little less depressing. So I will find a topic that is in some way uplifting in some way, shape, or form. If you have any thoughts on topics, things that you're thinking about, right? A lot has come up around social media. I've been thinking it keeps coming up in questions. To what extent are we vulnerable, as well as therapy, separate from medical providers? How are therapists either protected or vulnerable? Those are things that keep coming up in conversations. But please, email through the email that you get. If you just reply to that, it goes into a special inbox of mine, and any topics, speakers, I'm going to start having speakers where I interview folks, and so it's not just me, but any topics that you're interested in, please let me know. Any questions that just came out for those about removing? Yes. Yeah, I've heard very good things about that. Join deleteme.com. Agreed, Zachary. Very good. And Jen, let's add that to our email with the replay about the join deleteme.com as something folks can do. Yeah. All right, you guys rock. Happy Tuesday. They're better than Tuesdays. High five. All right, I'll catch you in 2 weeks.